Welcome to Flipping the Table. In this episode, Michael speaks with Cliff Pollard, the founder of Cream Co., a special processing facility serving regenerative and organic livestock farmers and ranchers on the West Coast. They talk about how Cliff and his team make it possible for small and medium-scale producers of very high-quality lamb, pork, and beef to survive in a world dominated by industrial meat factories. Enjoy the show.
I've been going on for years now about the mess in our meat system. 98% of the meat eaten in this nation and advanced economies of the world is produced via industrial systems that depend on monoculture cropping to feed animals in huge feedlots or concentrated animal feeding operations known as CAFOs. These facilities feed animals very high-octane diets to make them quickly gain mostly unhealthy fat. These diets are comprised of foods, most of which the animals would never encounter in a pre-industrial system. The CAFOs and meat processing facilities are hard on the animals, causing stress, stomach illness, water, and air pollution. The industrial-scale slaughter and packing plants are very dangerous places to work. Hundreds of workers died and tens of thousands fell ill during the first year of the COVID pandemic. You will remember plants shut down and meat all but disappeared from store shelves for surprisingly long periods of time. And every year, thousands of plant workers are injured on the job, where rapid repetitive motion break bodies down. Industrial meat is cheap on the surface, relatively anyway, but the cost to the planet, human health, and the quality of life for workers and animals is too high. Now, the root of the problem is that our industrial meat system is controlled by 3 or 4 large corporations. The industry is an oligopoly, which allows these companies to keep the price low for animals they buy, really hurting the farmers and ranchers raising livestock. The industrial system favors the largest operations that can live on low margins. The small and mid-scale producers are dying out, and that takes away from the resilience of our food system. The pandemic, as well as the extreme climate events that continue, have proved that to be resilient, we need diversity of scale and disbursement of processing plants across the entire landscape of the nation. The USDA recognizes the problem and is calling for transformation, particularly meat processing, by freeing up markets and expanding the number of plants serving small and mid-scale farmers and ranchers. Change must occur, and luckily it is, and the pace and scale are intensifying. Today, my guest is one of the people making this transformation possible. His name is Cliff Pollard, and he is the founder of Cream Co. It is an ingeniously envisioned company designed to serve the small and mid-scale producers of regional, grass-fed, organic, and other forms of high-value meat. Cliff and his skilled team are serving a growing marketplace, which we will explore. We will also talk about our collaboration with UC Davis's Food System Lab, a couple of very special chefs, and dozens of ranchers and farmers from across the state who are working to create a large supply chain of regional and regenerative meat for California's top universities and key hospitals. As with many of the folks I meet and speak with, Cliff had a special combination of parents and early career that prepared him perfectly to be part of this delicious revolution underway to transform our food system. So, if you want to access healthy meat that is good for the planet, for the producers, and the animals, I know you will enjoy my conversation with Cliff Pollard. Clifford Pollard, great to be here with you in Oakland, California at Cream Co., one of the coolest meat processing operations I've ever seen. You guys are doing incredible stuff, so we're going to talk about that today. You know, I always like to start with people's journey to this place, like where you were born, what in your early life brought you to be interested in this, and kind of the steps that brought you to Cream Co.
Sure, absolutely. So born and raised Oakland, California.
Hometown boy.
That's right. I went to culinary school, so very passionate about food, cooked professionally in the Bay Area for many years. And I was looking for a way to stay in food but not work on the line. Both of my parents come from agricultural backgrounds, so we have a 1,200-acre cattle ranch in Missouri.
Oh, wow.
My mother comes from a little island off the coast of Portugal, the Azores, the Terceira. And a lot of her life growing up was raising, the animals that they would then eat or the chickens that they would pull eggs from. And my father would actually raise animals and go to the farmer's market in Kansas City. And that's how the family created their sustenance and their life. So back to California, after culinary school, I loved food, wanted to stay in food, but didn't want to work on the line anymore. So I was looking for an opportunity in food that wasn't cooking, and I stumbled across this small company called the Pray the Ranch Meat Company. It's one of the first farm direct aggregators in California.
Up north, right?
Yeah, they're in Siskiyou County, the ranch is, the HQ is, and worked with them and really just fell in love with working with producers, bringing those products together, really servicing that need that really wasn't there, the missing middle, as we call it these days. But really kind of helping those producers get their products to market and tell their stories. And so just fell in love with that, stuck with it. And now it's 18 years later. I've been doing this in California for a very long time. So a lot of those big producers that you may know of are great friends of mine and of Cream Co. And we're just trying to build this platform that really creates access for producers and for consumers.
And when you say, I remember the Prather retail site at the Ferry Plaza Market. Did you work there? Is that what you mean? Or
Yeah,
did you work?
I worked all over the business. So, we had a little bit of warehousing at that point in time. And that's one of the problems that I saw with that business model that I wanted to solve with Cream Co. is that we outsource all of our processing. So that was a real bottleneck even for that business to grow. But we, had farmers markets, we had the ferry building, we had a restaurant, we did wholesale. It was a really interesting concept. I think it was a bit ahead of its time. So really through the school of hard knocks is how we've kind of built Cream Co. from those lessons learned doing it with other industry leaders at the time.
Okay, so before we get into a description where you really describe the things that we just saw on this very cool tour, why Cream Co.? Why did you name it Cream Co.?
Well, cream of the crop. So the best of the best, the cream is always rising. And what we didn't want to do is have like a ranch name or a farm name, because we're not a ranch, we're not a farm. We are a critical part of the USDA supply chain, helping to serve farmers and ranchers. But we didn't want to mislead the consumer with some sort of farm name or ranch name, which you see often. You see companies that have nothing to do with being a farm or being a ranch, and they're kind of, I think, misrepresenting themselves in the marketplace. We didn't want to do that, so we kind of chose a different name. Cool.
When you're asked, what is Cream Co., what do you say? What in terms of, because you do a lot of different things
we do.
here.
Yep.
So go for it.
Absolutely. So Cream Co. is a USDA processing platform, and we're creating greater access for farmers and ranchers and for buyers, whether you're a butcher shop or a restaurant or a corporate cafe. We're bridging the gap between farm direct distribution and broadline distribution. So
describe broadline for people they won't know.
So broadline distribution is a Sysco, a US Foods. It's case in, case out. It's very simple from that point of view. They only want to work with uniform metrics. It's very difficult for them to be nimble and to meet producers specifically where they're at. So we could work with a producer that's harvesting 2 head a month or 5 head a week or 40 head a week, because we're built in a way that we want to service those producers. So we could receive eighths and quarters or whole hogs, break them down, box them, get them into those uniform metrics that buyers are comfortable working with. And so broadliners really exist to kind of do that last mile distribution in a very uniform way.
Industrial,
centralized, industrialized. We kind of mitigate those difficult areas on the back end of the supply chain.
So what does that mean for people who don't know what a supply chain is that much?
Yeah, so what it means is, again, meeting our producers where they're at in their business growth. So if a producer only has the ability to deliver 300 ducks a month or 1,000 quail a week, whatever it is, we will build a supply chain with them from farm to slaughter to further processing. And by the time it gets through that back end of the supply chain to us, to our platform, we've turned it into that uniform metric that then a large institution, a large buyer, or even a restaurant can easily work with.
Okay.
So we're trying to really kind of manage what we call the missing middle and work with this robust bounty of agriculture that exists all across the West Coast and really turn those great products into uniform items that the buyer can easily work with.
And I even saw that you're working with some ranchers who are selling at farmers markets.
Absolutely.
So you do the whole gambit from farmers markets to a ranch that ships in cold boxes to someone's home, to retails, to restaurants, and to institutions like school districts and campuses.
Big time. And again, being part of the USDA supply chain was critical for us. We felt that was really necessary. So we want to be able to provide services. We're servicing our community. So yes, we buy animals, we process them, we sell them for our own means, but also we do further processing for our local ranching community. So a lot of producers send their animals here to be processed retail, and then it goes back to them to sell at the farmer's market or to their restaurant customers so that they could direct market it. So again, removing the barriers of what makes it difficult to exist and to scale in this environment, that's what Cream Co. is really doing. It's what we're built on.
Mm-hmm. And just to give more context so listeners understand, this is because in California, particularly with beef, most of the animals are shipped out of the state to be slaughtered in huge factories where thousands of cattle are slaughtered every day and packaged on a line and put into boxes and then shipped to Sysco and U.S. Foods and the other distributors, broadliners.
The disparity between small to medium scale production and industrialized production is wild. I mean, a huge industrial player, let's say a Cargill, they might process 3,000 head of cattle a day, 4 or 5 days a week. And so that has to be done in a very uniform way for them to make their profits and their dollars. It's not usually healthy for the planet, not healthy for the animal, not healthy for the consumer. The producers that we're working with at the top end are harvesting, 40 head, maybe 80 head a week at max. Mm-hmm. So like we're working at a very different end of the supply chain. Mm-hmm. It's an end that's not really that well serviced. It doesn't have a lot of infrastructure. It doesn't have a lot of resources. So we're trying to create that toolbox, trying to create these fundamental building blocks that allow it to exist, to survive.
Mm-hmm. So let's just talk about the different kinds of ranches you represent, because I saw a lot of grass-fed labeled stuff in the storage spaces. I saw really cool stuff around the Vieja Baja or Baja Vieja, which is the older cattle, which uses cattle that have finished their productive life as cows, birthing babies, and they can be utilized for meat too. So you have a broad range. Now, what percentage do you think of your meat production out of this facility? And I'm talking, let's talk sheep and cattle. I mean, let's just talk cattle because sheep are all grass finished.
Sure.
But the cattle, what percentage of them are actually grass finished?
Well, sheep are not all grass finished.
No?
There's a lot of grain finished sheep in this country, and there's a really big player here in California that does a lot of grain finishing. But
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, big time. And
well, that's because I buy most of my sheep directly from my farmers.
The good sheep is grass finished. So
yeah. Uh-huh.
But yeah, on the beef side, as far as split between grain and grass, it's pretty even. Mm-hmm. We might actually be leaning more towards grass. It could be something like 55-60% grass at this point in time. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting about the grass-fed end of our business is that the retail consumer wants that. And parents want that, kids want that, schools, institutions want to support grass-fed, grass-finished, and even regenerative beef. So that area continues to grow for us. We're seeing more and more activity, more and more pull towards grass-fed, grass-finished, local beef. And for us, we believe in like a regional supply reality. So when we say local, it's the West Coast. We're talking about the states that surround California, including California, that can facilitate growth across the sustainable and regenerative supply chains.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. One of the challenges we have, well, not this year because it's been this incredible wet year, but oftentimes it's hard to finish cattle on grass in California.
Yep.
So, I mean, there are a few places you can do it. Humboldt, up north, farther north, closer to the coast, better. Oregon, Washington. But it's often hard here. So as you think about this growing demand for grass-fed, and you and I are involved in a project together to try and increase the supplies of grass-fed to campuses University of California, others. Are you worried about the ability of the West Coast to produce, or do you think we can move cattle from Southern California to Northern California to Oregon, Washington to finish? How do you see that happening?
I mean, there's still a lot of production on the West Coast. So at this stage, I feel there's still ample live animal inventory. It's there. I do think that if we continue to see this pull in the market, and if we're successful, that we could start running into some supply issues. As we know, it takes 24 to 30 months to raise an animal. So
on grass, to finish it on grass versus 18 months.
Versus 18 to 20
in
on
a
grain.
feedlot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So it takes a bit of time to increase your supply. But the animals are out there. I mean, they can be accessed, they can be bought, they can be put on grass, they can be grown in this manner. So I think the supply will keep up and catch up if we do outpace it a little bit in the short term. Mm-hmm. But as of right now, plenty of supply, great producers on the West Coast that we're working with. And we kind of work with them all, like it's an equal opportunity supply chain as far as we're concerned. If you're doing the right thing, if you're raising animals correctly, we want to work with you.
Mm-hmm. And so describe what you mean by correctly, because there's a spectrum there, right?
Yep.
So why don't you describe the different ways that you think about the correct way to raise animals, or animals that meet a quality standard and let's say an ecological standard that you're seeking?
Sure. Yeah. So we kind of call it the spectrum of sustainability. So on that spectrum, on one edge, you have commodity products, and then you have conventional. And then at the midpoint, you have never ever, natural, organic type farming. And then you have sustainable and then regenerative at the far end. So we only operate in that never ever and up point in the supply chain. Mm-hmm. That's our minimum requirement.
Never ever meaning
no hormones, no antibiotics are ever used in the production of these animals. Of course, there's certain...
So feed supplements is how the hormones or the antibiotics get put into animals.
Exactly.
But really in USDA, is that allowed anymore?
Yeah, well, it depends on the species. In certain species, it's not. Certain species, it's still seen and used and allowed with conventional commodity products, but we don't allow it. Mm-hmm. Now, with a really small producer, if they have to treat an animal, that's okay. Like if the animal's actually sick and they have to treat it, we will allow for antibiotics to treat that animal to keep it healthy.
But it has to be kept off antibiotics before they can come to you.
That's right. Yep. So there has to be a period.
Have to clear.
It has to clear the system. So that's allowable. We have a supplier affidavit for all of our suppliers that we work with that details out how they handle those realities. Mm-hmm. But that's where we focus our efforts, is on that midpoint and up. And then, of course, regenerative and sustainable is really what we're looking for. So farmers that have practices that, at very least are breaking even with their ecological environment. So they're not degenerating it, sustainable ag. Mm-hmm. And then regenerative being that they're actually increasing the ecological reality.
Improving the health.
They're improving it. And then, that can be measured, and it is kind of, talked about from a variety of different ways. We really think about it through the lens of soil health. Mm-hmm. And that's really the big pull there with regenerative agriculture, is getting that soil health to improve and measuring that improvement over time.
So that would be, for our listeners, that would be carbon, the amount of carbon in the soil,
it's about
tilth is the word I was looking for. How much you can move the soil. It's not packed.
Right. Yep. The water retention.
Ability to absorb water.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So really the main principle is increasing the organic matter that's in the soil, the biomass in the soil, which then increases the biomass above the soil. Mm-hmm. And if you have greater biomass above the soil, then you can sequester more carbon from the atmosphere.
Right.
So you want to see that organic matter that's below ground increase, those networks of roots and bugs and that microbes that are all underneath the soil. That should be increasing over time with your animal husbandry practices. And if you're able to see that increase and measure that increase, then you're doing regenerative agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Good. So that's helpful. And, it requires that the rancher actually monitor and have it looked at. So there's a cost associated with that.
Often.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So regenerative meats are more expensive than commodity meats.
Yep.
And so are you finding that, I know we're living in an economic situation that's tougher than sometime in the past. So, are consumers, you said the market is growing, so consumers are willing to pay that much more for a regenerative grass-finished animal?
Yeah, I think so. There's definitely like the new age of younger consumers, and they want a better for you, better for the planet type product. They understand it. And, we're fortunate to live in NorCal. So like there's a really core base here of like really educated buyers at the farmers markets are always busy. They're talking to their producers. They know them. So they're kind of on the, they're on the edge of these trends up here in Northern California. But you're starting to see it pop up in other places like Southern California, New York, even Texas. So we have a regenerative beef brand that's in Texas right now at HEB, for instance. And you're seeing that it does have pull. Folks are looking for that in the marketplace. They're reading the labels. They're trying to understand, how do I buy beef that's actually better for the planet? If I'm going to eat meat, maybe I should be eating less meat, but better meat.
Yeah, less meat but better meat. That's often a thing that gets me. Actually, I don't want to talk about this yet. I want to talk a little bit more about the different brands. There are some really good retailers too, like Oliver's Market where I shop. I think there's 4 stores in Sonoma County. They buy from Stemple Creek. They buy from Humboldt Beef Company.
Yep.
Grass. These are both grass-finished animals. Meat's expensive, $27. I paid $27.99 for a steak the other day per pound.
Yep.
It was delicious, really well marbled, nice cuts. So people are paying, and you feel like this is a growth system.
It is. I mean, I think it is. I think that, meat's one of those tricky things in America because it's been so heavily subsidized for so long. So the average meat consumer might go to a Walmart or a Target and see $5 a pound ribeyes. And that really skews the impression that buyer has of like what meat should cost. And that's a problem. Like that's a challenge that these producers that are working really hard to raise animals the right way, which is expensive, they have to kind of combat that and figure out how to navigate that reality that in other ways, other places, the consumer can go buy a $5 a pound ribeye, and then you have a $27 a pound ribeye that's being sold at Oliver's. So it's a big disparity, but it's expensive to raise meat well. And again, it's like maybe you shouldn't be eating that $5 per pound ribeye. It's likely not good for you or for the planet or for the animal. So maybe save up, make meat more of a special thing versus trying to have it every day and paying those lower prices.
It would be interesting just to run through some of the channels that you feed so people know where to buy those products. I saw Eataly, which talk about Eataly because my association with slow food back in the day. I remember when Eataly started and went to the opening in Italy. So talk about Eataly.
Sure. Yeah. So Eataly opened up in Silicon Valley. They have a new location here in California, and they were looking for, how do they differentiate? How do they stand out with their meat supply here in NorCal, especially given that this market is really well educated on who these producers are. They want to know who the farmers are, where the meat's coming from, et cetera. So they dedicated their entire meat case to Cream Co. at the Silicon Valley location, which is awesome. You go there, you see basically our entire portfolio, all of our producers represented behind the case. They have our...
You mean they're named?
They're named behind the case. You can read about them. You can read about Cream Co. For us, we kind of view, and as far as other channels go, public schools, universities, brick and mortar retail, still, I think restaurants is still the major channel for us. We're still doing the most with independent restaurants, but we are very diversified and we're trying to work with a lot of different segments of the marketplace. One of the fastest growing ones is public schools, hospitals, universities. You're seeing this real pull into those institutions because they want to serve meat that's healthier for their student bodies, for their patients. They understand that there's a degree of, preventative medicine that's happening with the food that you consume. So they want to kind of get on that leading edge and start thinking about, okay, how do we keep people healthy? Well, let's feed them healthier food. That's a good place to start.
We hope you're enjoying the conversation. If you are, please rate our podcast and offer a review. Your voice will help us grow our listener base, which helps us sustain the funding to share these conversations with the people and organizations shaping a more just and regenerative future. A future in which the food and farm businesses are helping to solve the largest challenges of our time.
One of the things I'm interested in, because I saw Stemple Creek's label here, some other labels of ranches that I know. I think you do Richard's,
Stemple.
So those guys, those ranches have their own supply chains. I mean, they have their own customer base. What percentage of your meat that comes through this plant, and not just beef, I'm talking about lambs, I'm talking about hogs, whatever you're doing.
Right.
What percentage of it is sold by the ranchers or the producers into their own supply chains? And what percentage are you moving to your customer base that's buying Creamco meat?
It really varies producer by producer. So like Stemple does the majority of their own self-distribution, and we help them in a lot of ways with maybe the more challenging elements of their distribution. So if they need like a net weight retail product to go to a specific buyer, we could facilitate that for them.
You can package it for them.
We could package it because we're USDA. So we could do the roll stock, front back label, all the bells and whistles, third party audited, et cetera, et cetera. But really what we do with like the grass fed in particular is we pool together and aggregate supply from all these different producers to create these SKUs, these uniform SKUs that, again,
product lines
right, that big buyers want to work with.
Give us some examples of who's buying from you.
Sure, yeah. So the Vacaville Unified School District is a great example. Mount Diablo Unified School District, Madera, and they're buying these products that we've created, hot dogs and fully cooked hamburgers, and those finished goods are actually supporting a handful of farmers, maybe up to 5 or 6 at any given time, because we're taking supplies that they can't sell through their own direct channels. We're buying them and then creating these unique product lines that could then be sold into these large institutions.
Yeah, so that's a project you and I are working on, is how do we aggregate hundreds of ranchers to do that, to supply, let's say, the whole University of California system.
Yep.
Or all 5 hospitals in the UC system, or hospitals all across the state. That takes a lot of ranchers, mid and small scale.
That's right.
You have to be able to aggregate them, because one of the things that we've learned, and you knew this long before us, is that it's very hard sometimes for the ranchers to move all that grind meat or those braising meats. They sell the steaks easily.
Yeah, often the middle meats are easier to sell, and often it's the brisket, the top round, the bottom round, the trim that's more difficult. Now, the synergy there is that those are often the cuts that large institutions want, but they need them at such a huge volume, it's almost impossible for any one ranch to work with them. So it's impossible for one ranch to service, let's say, Google with all the beef stew that it needs. But if you pool together 5, 10, 20 ranches, get all their top round together in one place, you dice it so that it's the same, you spec it out, you package it the same, give it a nice G10 barcode.
What's a G10?
It's a barcode essentially that's scannable into their inventory control system, which is something that not a lot of meat processors do, but we do. But you kind of get it again. You turn this diverse nebulous matrix of supply chain into uniform SKUs for these large buyers, and then all of a sudden you could actually engage with them. You could work with them. You could get enough supply to actually deliver to them at the volumes that they require. So that's a big part of what Creamco is built to do. Again, bridging that gap between farm direct distribution, which is very challenging, not because of the lack of willingness. Folks want to work with farmers, but they're so used to working with broadliners that make it really easy. Dropping off pallets, they have the vehicles, they'll place an order at 5 p.m., get it next day. So those are the types of services that we're rendering to the rancher and to the large buyers to again, try to bridge that gap.
So you're devising a niche and a system that's going to serve the mid and small scale ranchers in the state of California, Oregon, and Washington, and probably beyond as time goes on.
Yep.
It occurs to me that you're talking about a growth business when the headlines are all about the kind of an anti-meat sentiment, which has always really bothered me, because it says to me that people don't really understand the role of hooved animals in the ecosystem. And I'm just curious about how do you deal with the anti-meat sentiment that people are talking about? I mean, you come and you work with animals every day, and people are complaining and vilifying those who raise meat or work in the meat world. How do you deal with that?
It's complex. We're certain. I wouldn't say that we're aligned with the anti-meat complex, but we definitely believe that folks should not be eating conventional and commodity meats. Like they're not good for you. They're not good for the planet.
Not good for the animals.
Not good for the animals. It's not something that we advocate for. So we do believe that there is a place for these plant-based programs potentially. I'm not sure. It's still kind of new to me. I'm still learning a lot about their supply chains and really the monocropping that's involved and how healthy
all the chemicals,
how healthy
bind.
is it actually?
Yeah.
I think it varies from company to company. And now there's a lot of these companies. So, we're still kind of looking at it and we're still curious about what exactly is going on in that space. But the type of agriculture that we're supporting and promoting and trying to get to market is a healthier version of agriculture. It's the type of ag that you want to see, the type of meat that you want to eat. It's better for you, better for the planet, better for the animals. Mm-hmm. So that's where we're focused. What I find really funny, really interesting is that these brands, these alt meat companies, they're buying our meat all the time. The companies are. So we see them come through on the direct-to-consumer channel, and they're buying it to test it, right? And they'll buy it for months trying to comp their products against actual best-in-class meat. And I've yet to taste something that has, kind of fit the bill or kind of, figured it out quite as well. Mm-hmm. We truly believe, and we look at everything through the culinary lens. If you're going to get folks to change their behaviors, it has to be because it tastes great. It has to be an amazing tasting product to get folks to change their behavior. So we're not just in the business of selling meat shapes. We call them meat shapes, just like highly verified, certified triangles, hexagons, ovals that you see in a lot of brick and mortar retailers. That's not the business that we're in. We're looking for the intersection of impact and quality. And we really believe that something has to taste great if you're going to change folks' behavior.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about aged beef. And I read an interesting article on your website about both dairy animals and older cows that have finished their productive life as mothers and their use in the meat sector rather than just, in the old days, those animals would just get slaughtered and rendered or something. But there are possibilities of actually where people really love the flavors. Can you talk about what you did last night?
Absolutely. Yeah. Last night we had a bit of like a secret steakhouse dinner with some friends on a book that we're collaborating on. And we ate what we call vaca vieja. And it's, this is a traditional Spanish thing that happens in the north of Spain, Basque Country, where they're eating older animals. They have been for a very long time. And with an older animal of any species, you're going to have so much more flavor developed in that meat. It's going to have different textures and different flavor. So we think it's really interesting. It's something, in America, we've industrialized meat production to focus on how quickly can we grow an animal and how tender can we make it. Those have been the priorities, right? The amount of marbling, the tenderness, how fast can we do it? So we're kind of flipping that on its head and asking, why is that the priority? Should we be looking at meat that way? And it's often the case that older animals, some of these animals we were eating last night were 10 years old, 100% grass-fed, grass-finished. They have such an intense flavor that you're not going to be able to find with any 18-month, 24-month grain-finished animal. It's so different, the terroir, the texture. It's just a whole different reality. So we really like that degree of experimentation. We also love the ecological benefits of it, of eating an animal that has spent its life producing more food. In the case of upcycling dairy cows, they've produced so much food over the course of their life, and then you're respecting them in those final days by harvesting them and enjoying them as well as meat.
Yeah, I like it. Those who care about animal welfare, one of the things that I've always felt is that it's really important to let an animal live out live as much as long as it can in the way that it's supposed to, which is not in a feedlot. It's in a field. That's what they co-evolved to do, is eat grass and move around with their calves and with the bulls and live their lives that's indigenous to them. So you're providing a way for that to happen. I am very curious, though, about the dairy issue, because I was just up in Humboldt in Ferndale, where the industry's taken a real hit. It's really hard right now. A lot of dairies are going out of business, and those are almost all organic dairies up there. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just curious, is there a way to build a supply chain that would help those ranchers, those dairymen up there who are doing organic, regenerative dairy work? Is there a way to help that kind of industry? Do you think there's a market for their animals?
There is a market for their animals, and traditionally it's been really large grinders, folks like big burger businesses, McDonald's, In-N-Out, et cetera, that will buy those animals. And they grind good. They're tasty. They're like delicious to eat. I really enjoy eating ground dairy meat. When it comes to like deriving a huge premium from these types of programs, they have to have a really nice body condition.
And so, what does that mean for a listener?
So that means that there's enough muscle and fat around the animal in the right places that when you harvest it and break it down, you're going to have a degree of uniform muscle mass that's well marbled, has good coverage, good fat, so that it's a good tasting piece of meat. It's often the case, in particular with dairies, that they're running those animals pretty hard, so they're not all going to have a great body condition at the end of its life cycle. Mm-hmm. And dairy ranchers also kind of tend to hold on to those animals until it's time to go, until it's like, okay, here's the 10 that we're sending to slaughter today. In that group of 10, maybe 2 of them might have a good body condition. The rest of them, you're going to bone out and grind. Mm-hmm. So you would have to create some new standard as far as what those dairy ranchers should be shooting for in order to have the right body condition to be able to derive the premium that they could get with a really healthy, great body scoring animal. Now, it can be done. We've done it. I mean, we've paid ranchers on a scale of basically the body condition of those animals. And so they get a higher price for animals that have great body condition that we could break down into cuts and sell ribeyes in New York's. Mm-hmm. And we'll pay a different price for the ones that we can't do that with. Mm-hmm. And so it's completely doable to do that.
But you have to have a program as a producer.
You have to have a program. I think, again, like it would require having a really strong partner in slaughter that you could kind of like...
Because those dairy cattle are huge.
They're big. They can be massive. I mean, some of the animals, even on our Vaca Vieja program, the average carcass weight of a grass-fed animal is going to be somewhere between 690 and 750. At least it should be. Mm-hmm. Sometimes with those Vaca Vieja animals, they're 1,000 pounds. They're massive. And it's really, you get those ribeyes. I mean, you're talking about a whole different beast at that point in time. Like, it's a whole different animal, literally. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's interesting. And I'm glad to hear that you're going into this idea of older animals and bringing that to the American palate. I think it's wonderful. And then we give animals a longer life, which is cool. So what is your biggest challenge as you think about the growth of the company? We really looked into the challenge around slaughter, and there's big backlogs, and it's really because of the cut and wrap facilities around the state of California. We can't get enough animals through the facilities to grow the market very quickly because of that backlog. I mean, are you thinking about expansion? Do you need to expand? Is that easy to do?
Yeah, we just opened up a DC in LA, so a distribution center in LA. So we have like a simple but functional case in, case out. We have trucks down there, drivers. We're starting to kind of build that market up. Challenges in this space, infrastructure, huge. Just like access to infrastructure, access to the toolboxes, the high minimums that co-packers require. That can be very, very challenging because
You mean you have to have enough animals?
Animals or just raw materials. Like to work with a really great hot dog producer, you might have to run a batch of 2,000 hot dog pounds minimum to just get in the door. Really, they're going to want to push it towards like 10,000 pounds per run. So, okay, maybe you could produce that much raw material, but then you're sitting on those hot dogs for 4 months as you try to sell them. So balancing growth and scale, and there's a variety of pain points I think, across the supply chain that make it difficult. But, it's just a really kind of guarded old space. There's not a lot of innovation in the meat supply chain. We're trying to provide it. We're trying to create a different approach, a different way of really thinking about these small to medium scale producers that have their brand, and who are we as a brand? How do we all work together to see that tide rise together? But there's not really a blueprint for it. We can't reference another business that has done this before outside of industrial ag. And we're not trying to become this monolithic entity, like we're trying to do this at like a medium-sized regional scale. And that's something that really, so far, we haven't seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a challenge. I know. It's like wineries that are mid-scale. That's a tough space to be. You're either really tiny and you charge $200, $300, $500, $1,000 a bottle, or you're really big.
Right.
So
I do think the price of food and the consumer perception of the price of food is one of the biggest challenges. It's expensive. Like, it's expensive to do this work. If you want to eat a land-to-market certified, regenerative, grass-fed, grass-finished steak, like that's comes at a cost. Like there's a real cost to that. And everybody has to make their margin. The rancher has to make their margin. The processor has to make their margin. The last mile distributor has to make their margin to survive. So there is a real cost to it. And the race to the bottom mentality that big ag has created for everybody, the overly subsidized mentality of like, oh, well, we have to use these inputs to make these animals, that has created this race to the bottom on price points. And it's very challenging to work against that, to swim upstream of these major conventional commodity players.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Talk about land to market, because I know that's an emerging. So this is about regenerative ranching, a way to certify or make it clear and legitimate that farmers are doing a certain thing or ranchers are doing a certain thing. Land to market is an emerging brand or label certification system.
Yep.
Describe that and how that will end up on packages eventually, maybe, and how ranchers get involved and how you relate to it. How what's your relationship to that?
Yeah, these certifications, they're North Stars, right? They kind of lay out a set of practices or principles that they want to see a producer maintaining, or they want to see empirical data proving that somebody is moving this direction. So in land to market's case, that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to create an empirical system where you measure the soil. Are you improving the organic matter? Aren't you improving the organic matter? And they have their system and process and timelines of how they do that. We're seeing a number of other regenerative certifications come online right now as well. And they all kind of approach it from a slightly different angle. And so it's all great. We love to see it in the space. We also do see consumer certification fatigue. It becomes challenging for the average consumer to really understand what these seals and certifications mean, which can be a bit troubling as well. Because really at the end of the day, we just want folks to buy great, regional, delicious meats that are raised correctly. So, how do you verify that? How do you validate that? Do you trust the brand? Do you trust the certification? It's a big question. It's a question that the whole industry is trying to figure out right now, really what the best path forward is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's land to market, there's regenerative organic.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two that I'm most aware of.
Mm-hmm. Regenified, I think, is another one.
Regenified is another one. Okay.
And I think Certified Humane has one. Mm-hmm. Animal Welfare Approved has one. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a lot.
American Grass-Fed, I
think they have one as well.
Yeah. So, well, that kind of gets us into something. We're getting closer to the end here, so I just wanted to bring up a couple of things. So I was reading a speech that Tom Vilsack, the Secretary of Agriculture, USDA, gave on March 16th before the Senate Ag Committee. It was quite interesting. He was really talking about the transformative thinking at USDA, which did not exist in previous years. I mean, it is a real focus on regional food systems. They've invested $3.1 billion into the meat supply chain system, trying to fix the lack of processing around the United States, more small processors in regions. They're trying to break up the big corporations, the control of those 5 corporations over 90% of the meat in this nation.
Yep.
They're really investing in that. And so it says the timing is good. Like we have some allies.
It is. It's weird with the USDA funding. Like it's almost like they missed the middle, though. Like they went all the way to the far end of like, who's the tiniest state inspected plant? Let's give them money to go USDA. Well, great, we should do that, but it's also having a very small impact on that community. You have to invest in kind of like this moderate middle, like this middle that's not tiny, like a middle that's impactful, that's actually building and scaling and growing. And they kind of missed the mark on that, I would say. Like I haven't seen a lot of funding for entities like Creamco in that mix. But if you're way smaller than Creamco, there's all types of opportunities. You can get grants for X, Y, and Z and funding X, Y, and Z. So I do think there's a bit of a miss there. I hope that they will catch up and kind of fix that issue and really look at like this, that middle market of like the 20 million to 50 million size entities that are looking for support as well. Because that's really where you're going to see scale. That's where you're going to have that like more resilient, decentralized regional players coming up that can go toe to toe with the broadliners. And that's really what it comes down to, is that we want to be able to compete be competitive with broadline distribution, because we could focus our energies on the right areas of the supply chain. Broadliners just can't, they won't. They just,
Cisco and US Foods doesn't want that.
They're not going to, you know? So we need to kind of reinforce a competitive landscape. And we do want to support the very, very small, but we also want to support the folks that are in that mid space coming up that can really compete with that.
Oh, I was going to say, because you guys, those really small plants cannot supply a school district, but
no.
You can. Those little guys can't supply University of California. You guys can. So that's really what you're talking about.
It's a food web, you know. Like you need it. You need it all. You need the really small, you know, quail processing plant and the rabbit processing plant and the small beef slaughterhouse. But that has to feed into what that next step in the supply chain is. And that is the space that's not getting a whole lot of attention. It's kind of like you're either super tiny and you're raising 10 beautiful animals on a hilltop in Pescadero and you're getting that support, or you're Cargill, Tyson, JBS, and you're getting a whole different type of support. It's that gap that exists in the middle, that moderate size supply chain gap that's there, that is still kind of looking for that type of support, that type of funding from the government.
Well, that's good to know, and that's good feedback for the USDA to hear. And I know there's more money coming.
Yeah.
So hopefully they're going to hit that sweet spot.
I think they're hearing this. I hope that they're getting this feedback and that they're hearing it, and that hopefully they're going to make some changes and kind of modify how those grants work for that area. I hope so.
Great. So as we close out, I just want to talk about, you and I are working on an event that's going to happen on June 8th in Sacramento.
Yep.
We're calling it the California Regenerative Regional Meat Summit, and it'll be at Mulvaney's B&L, which is a cool restaurant in Sacramento that is farm to table, and we'll be working with Santana Diaz, the chef and culinary executive for UC Davis Med Center, who's been working with
That's
you
right.
on delivering grass-fed to his patients.
That's right.
And he feeds tons of those patients every day. And my nephew, who was in a very bad car accident, was there for like a month, and he said the food was great at UC Med Center.
Yep.
He was thrilled about the food, so that's pretty cool. So our hope is to get the state of California to really throw its support behind the idea of the entire UC system, 10 campuses and 5 med centers, buying the meats that you deliver.
That would be amazing.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
Because it would be a model. I just saw Alice Waters the other night. She's throwing her support behind this idea because this is what she wants to see happen.
Sure. Yeah.
The University of California.
Well, the excuses are running out, you know, like it exists. The supply is there. The middle supply chain is being built. We're at the vanguard of it. We're making it happen. We're able to do it with Cal Berkeley, with UC Davis. I mean, these are large entities that for a long time thought it couldn't be done. Nobody's going to be able to scale and aggregate enough supply to service our needs. Well, we are. We're doing it. So from my point of view, it's kind of like, well, you know, if you want to actually see this in your institution, make the call, make it happen, because really there's no reason why you can't. We have the logistics, we have the suppliers, we have the processing. It's ready to roll. So whoever's telling you it can't be done, well, they're not telling you the truth. It can be done. So, you know, it's time to get moving.
Right on. That's great. I just want to thank you, Cliff, for your vision around what you created to serve the types of farms and ranches we want to see in the state of California. Really appreciate your vision and your hard work, because I know it's a lot of hard work.
Thank
I know you work your butt off to get it done. You have a cool company here. And how can people find Cream Co. Meats? Where can they buy your meats? Can they buy on your website?
Yeah, you can buy it direct. You can go to any of our retail partners, so Buy Right Grocery, Berkeley Bowl, Good Earth Natural Grocery. So we're here. We have a pretty big footprint in the Bay Area.
Creamco.com?
Creamcomeats.com.
Creamcomeats.com. Go there. I'm gonna get some meat from you right off your website, because I looked. You have a lot of different things you can do. You can sell people, so that's fantastic.
Yep. Creamcomeats.com. It's all there. The best of everything we have is online.
Great. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Thank you for listening, and thank you to our sponsors, the Ladybug Foundation, Dan and Quincy Imhoff, Beth and Mark Wyatt, Cindy Daniel, and Doug Lipton. Roots of Change is a program of the Public Health Institute.